So as was mentioned on the screen, I'm part of what is known as the Publishing Services Department. The Publishing Services Department is responsible for all messaging of the LDS Church. So we're responsible for all broadcasts, film content, the church's websites, all of the curriculum that is produced, that is used worldwide by the church. As a broadcaster, we broadcast in more languages than anyone else in the world by a factor of 3 times. We do our worldwide events in 96 languages. That was held just a weekend ago, and we were able to deliver it to the world in a faster, more effective way than we've ever had in the past, due to some of the changes that I'm going to show you today. So our purpose within the LDS Church is to create powerful experiences that bless lives and hasten the work. So we do that through all of the different types of media that the church produces. So a little history of long-term preservation as viewed by the LDS Church. The questions come up: how long can we store important assets, and how long is long enough? So when I was young, when I was a child, one of my favorite movies featured Charlton Heston, the great movie, The 10 Commandments. I hope all of you have seen that great movie. Fantastic movie, one of the truly epic feature films of the time, and it's still today holds up as a marvelous movie. During the telling of the story of Moses, of course, you can't leave out the experience that Moses has in obtaining the 10 Commandments, what we all know as the 10 Commandments, which were inscribed on tablets and given to Moses. And it was a very dramatic, very visual effects intensive piece, especially for the time. This was created many, many, many years ago. So Moses lived approximately 1400 years BC. The scholars vary on that by maybe even a couple hundred years, but approximately 1400 years BC. The first 5 books of the Old Testament are known as the books of Moses, because Moses was primarily the record keeper of those. So I live in a town named Lehi, Utah. Lehi, Utah is named after a prophet that we revere, named the prophet Lehi, who lived 600 years BC. So several hundred years after Moses. And Lehi lived in Jerusalem and was commanded to leave and to journey to find a new land. And he was a contemporary to the prophet Jeremiah in the Old Testament. And when he left, he actually was sent back to Jerusalem to obtain a record. And that was known as the brass plates, which contained the books of Moses. And it was very important for him to take with him on his journey what he referred to as the law, or the books of Moses, all of the teachings of Moses. Lehi traveled first kind of south and then southeast, and traveled through this peninsula and arrived at an area over here on the right that he referred to as Bountiful. And that journey took him 8 years, traveling in the wilderness. That was, of course, a very difficult wilderness at the time. And then he crossed the ocean and brought with him, of course, these records. And he made it to what is now Central America. There's again some scholarly debate as to where he actually landed. It's believed to be around Guatemala, and began his family, or the perpetuation of his family, was in that area of the world. Now they of course kept records, and many records were kept throughout the next 1,000 years in Central America, and these records were eventually compiled by a man named Mormon. And the reason that the church is always given the name the Mormon Church is because of the Book of Mormon, which was a compilation of all of these records by this man named Mormon. Mormon lived in 400 AD, and he compiled them largely on tablets, on gold plates. And those gold plates were then given to his son, Moroni, and Moroni buried them in the earth. They were then uncovered in 1827 or 1824. Were given and actually given to Joseph Smith in 1827, translated into English in 1829 and delivered to the world as the Book of Mormon. So here's a little bit of the history, the time frame. 1400 BC, Moses lived. Lehi, 600 BC. Mormon, 400 AD. Joseph Smith, 1829 AD. How do you keep something safe for a very long period of time? Inscribe it on gold, right? And bury it, right? Very simple. Right? Yes. Very expensive storage, right? Hard to create, very hard to etch. Inside the Book of Mormon, many of the prophets, the scholars that wrote in there, actually refer to how difficult it was to inscribe on gold. You can imagine that, right? So where are we today? Well, the Publishing Services Department creating all of this media, we don't quite have the luxury of inscribing everything on gold. So a couple of our current projects that we're dealing with right now are working with our international area offices we have around the world, and they are now creating more and more media. So, for instance, our office in Brazil is creating media for Brazil. And our webpage, LDS.org, if you're in Brazil and you are a Brazilian speaker, you will be having an experience about, not only in Portuguese, but you will be getting media that is relevant to you in Brazil. And that is the case throughout the world. So one of our big projects is internationalizing the church's websites and all of the church's media to make content relevant to you wherever you are in the world. We're doing cloud-enhanced workflows. That's actually a big part of delivering this content to the area offices. In our worldwide event a week and a half ago, we delivered our content faster than we ever have before because of what we did using cloud-enhanced workflows and being able to better utilize the cloud for doing a lot of the work, and I'll talk about that here in just a second. We have a growing archive, as was mentioned. I came into my current position because I started asking the questions as a sound designer about what are we doing with all these digital assets. And this was back in 2007, 2008. And we were creating all this content, and I was a sound mixer at the time and dealing a lot with the creation of media. And I kept saying, we just finished a project, now what? And started raising that question up, and finally was sitting in a room with a very top executive in our organization, and one of the others in the room kind of went, Richard Duke. And suddenly I found myself in a new position building the church's digital media library and digital media archive. And that's what I've been about since 2008. I have a growing archive. The other thing that we're working on very aggressively is multi-site preservation. Many of you are familiar with the church's family search efforts. We, of course, are collecting an enormous amount of genealogical data, have been since the organization of the church back at the time of Joseph Smith, but of course that's accelerating. It's free. Any of you can use it. Go to familysearch.org. You'll find photographs of your great-great-great ancestor, great-great-aunt, or grandmother, things like that. It's a place that anyone can upload pictures, anyone can upload stories, documents, things like that, and it's really building the family tree of the entire world population. So let's talk about a couple of our projects, the international area offices. Our approach is to actually use a small NAS in each area office, replicate that content to S3, back up the S3 copy to the archive. And so depending on where you are in the world, if you're needing to edit media in an office, then you're connected to that NAS. If you're another office that wants to share that content, you might be going to S3. But ultimately, all of that will make its way back to our archive. Cloud-enhanced workflows. We prepare a lot of VOD content. Again, as I say, we prepare content in 96 languages. All of our VOD content, that's interpreted live during our broadcasts of when we do our Worldwide General Conference is what we call it. And we've been able to deliver that content now within a matter of hours, chunked up in lots of different pieces, each of the different presentations. In a 36-hour period, we create 16,000 files, media files, that are ultimately available for download, distribution, etc. We do a lot. We're making tremendous strides and very aggressively doing our visual effects rendering in the cloud. It's for us one of the greatest uses of cloud technology. It's actually not, for us, we don't view it as a storage medium. We view it as a work medium. We need to do work there. And so we put content up in the cloud for the purpose of doing work. And the beauty and the promise of the cloud is our ability to spike in use and enable tens of thousands of cores to do rendering and then spin it right back down. And we would, of course, not ever go out and purchase those tens of thousands of cores, but we're certainly happy to rent them, especially when it comes to a couple of days or even a couple of weeks. We have an ongoing or a growing presence in our users generating their own content and uploading it to us. That's video content, still content, music content, all of those kind of things. And we have found the cloud has been a tremendous vehicle for user-generated content and the submission of user-generated content to us, validating it, looking at it, actually transcoding it and pulling it back down. So our focus is enabling services when and where they are needed. That's really the key of our cloud-based initiatives. Speed and efficiency is, of course, the promise, and we're realizing it in a big way, and very excited about it. So again, it's built for work, prepares content for distribution, and we back up a copy into the archive. So this is one of our recent additions in the AWS world. This is some of our VOD workflow that we used a week and a half ago. Just kind of a high level. This is where all the files move, what starts on premise, where the encoders sit for this live content, and ultimately making their way to Akamai and to AWS's CloudFront CDN. Those are the two primary CDNs that we use. We also use Verizon and we use YouTube, of course. So growing our archive is another, of course, big initiative. We have millions of assets. We create about 1.25 petabytes of new media each year. And so that's an ongoing effort. We also have still about 85,000 videotapes still to migrate. We started migrating media about 5 years ago, and we pursued that aggressively. About 85,000 tapes still left to do, working our way through our old videotape archive. So again, we build it for work. Ultimately, the purpose of this content is to save it, preserve it, keep it, make it usable, reusable, etc. Preparing content for the archive is another big part of it. Adding metadata services is another piece of what we're doing, and the cloud has certainly enabled us to be able to do that. So has digitizing these assets. You know, there's a lot of our old content. We've digitized our general conference content now back 70 years. We have wire recordings, and we have some of the earliest recording technology. We have our own telecine. We're doing our own film transfers, all of that. That content becomes much more usable when we've created a proxy, when we add metadata to it, when we put it into our asset management systems, and people can easily view it and say, oh, I need that little chunk. I'll pull that out, etc. Multi-site preservation is the last effort that I'm going to kind of focus on today. We believe strongly in the need for distributing our content throughout the world and making sure that we have content in multiple sites, and making sure that our preservation effort is about ensuring that media is kept safe from any catastrophic event throughout the world. So again, our approach is very much around building it for work, making it accessible to leaders of the church, members of the church, wherever they are in the world, and that everything doesn't have to come back, or you're not always drawing content out of Salt Lake City or pushing content into Salt Lake City. So preparing content for preservation is a big part of that, and again, our focus is really worldwide and being able to have content come into our preservation systems from wherever it's generated. So it can come in from Africa, from Brazil, as easily as it can from Lehi, Utah, where I live. And then, of course, replicate content into different geographical zones. We've heard a lot about that today. I'm sure that we'll continue to hear a lot about that and that importance of that. So in summary, and kind of looking back at our history, planning for preservation is key, absolutely key to what we're about. We need to use good materials, including good systems. We need to plan for future transformations. We know that codecs will change. We know that tape technology will change. We know that systems will change. So a big part of our preservation effort and all of the work that we do is actually planning for future transformations. And we don't necessarily know what all of those are, but we're planning and doing the best that we can to be prepared for those for the future. And then, of course, to gather as much metadata as possible so that we have information about all the content that we have. And thank you.
Thank you, Richard. So the next presenter I'd like to welcome up is with Ovation, Bo Kennedy. And Ovation provides sophisticated and scalable data management solutions for customers worldwide. What's interesting about Ovation is very similar to Spectre. They're very focused in the areas that they go into, and they have two very different and unique markets that they provide their solutions in. One is the media and entertainment market, and the other is the oil and gas. So they bring a very keen approach to understanding customers' workflows. Not only are they an integrator of SpectraLogic, thank you, they're also a customer of SpectraLogic. And they use our products as well. So with that, Bo Kennedy.
Can you hear me? All right. Great. Yeah, my name is Bo Kennedy. I work for a company called Ovation Data Services. Most of you have probably never heard of it. We're based in Houston, Texas, but we also have offices in London. 2 offices, actually, one in Orpington near Kent, and the other actually in Soho. We're a data management company in that we take digital assets and we preserve them for the duration of their life. And to put that in perspective, I have 2 children, 21 and 23. They really have never known a world without the internet, or as they call it, the interwebs, and cell phones. And when they got their cell phones with little cameras on them, they started taking pictures of everything they could see. And then when they got Facebook, they started posting all those pictures on Facebook. And I wanted to caution them at one point. I said, just keep in mind, digital is forever. So if you're going to take a picture of yourself doing something silly and you put it on the internet, it's going to be there for the rest of your life and come up at the most embarrassing time. Well, our job as Ovation Data Services is to take those digital assets, not generally pictures, but big data, and preserve them from the time they were created, often in the 1960s or the 50s, and keep them viable forever, effectively. And to put that in perspective, we've been talking about this already. You can see the curve, the growth rate in data. This question mark up there is the 40 zettabytes. Who really knows how high it's going to be? As you can see, the curve is accelerating. The total amount of data in the world is a staggering quantity. Right now, we're at 2015, and it says 7 point something zettabytes. That's total data in the world. This is Ovation Data's growth. If you look, and I'm looking down at the slide so I can read it, in 2004 is when we crossed a threshold of having 1 petabyte of data pass through our doors in a given year. You can see in 2014, we routinely have 6 petabytes passing, or by 2014, we've had 6 petabytes passing through on an annual basis. And that is just transferred petabytes. That's not internal production work or anything.